Hans von Spakovsky. He is the senior legal fellow at Advancing American Freedom. Hans, welcome back, sir.
Larry, thanks for having me back. Happy Friday and happy pre-July 4th weekend.
Yes, sir. Amen. Amen to that. We've got a lot of subjects to run through. I want to begin with the SAVE Act very quickly. I want to pose something to you. Jamie Raskin was a guest on the Pompous Horse program hosted by Lawrence O'Donnell, and he was asking him, how much control of elections does the Constitution grant to the President of the United States? Obviously looking for a way to torpedo the Save America Act. Raskin's response, zero. He said the Constitution vests that power in the states and complementary or supplementary power in Congress. Is he correct? And what was he trying to get through?
Well, he was trying to say that some of the executive orders the president has issued is wrong. But if you look at the executive orders carefully, for example, his last one, the president's executive order is directed at the U.S. Postal Service and how it handles election-related mail. And the president does have authority over the Postal Service. You know, his executive order wasn't telling the states what they have to do. It was telling federal agencies what they have to do. Another quick example is the president directed the Department of Homeland Security to get rid of the red tape and make its alien database available to state election officials so they can use it to check the citizenship status of people who are registered to vote. All of that is well within the authority of the president.
So everything the pompous horse Lawrence O'Donnell was presenting was a red herring and just trying to get people to follow this trail.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And anytime Jamie Raskin says anything, I've known him for many years. You can just pretty much discount anything that Raskin says.
I do. Hans, now getting into the actual couple rulings issued yesterday. One, that migrants can be rejected at the border. They do not have to be allowed entry into our country to then go through adjudication. That was a very big win for Trump. And our nation.
Yeah. And, you know, the thing that everybody forgets about this is this was actually started by the Obama administration, because in 2016, there were so many aliens trying to get across the southern border that customs agents were basically overwhelmed. And so they started a system in which they only would allow a certain number a day to cross over the border, get processed, and then if they wanted to claim asylum, they could do that. This case was brought by the aliens who were told, you have to stay in Mexico. And they sued, claiming, hey, you can't keep us from crossing the border, and even if we're not in the United States, we can still claim asylum. And the Supreme Court, 6-3, said, no, that's not the case. The statute very specifically says you can only claim asylum once you have arrived into the United States.
Now, how does that differ from what we saw during the years of Cuba and the Clinton administration, wet foot, dry foot policy, reference of Cubans who were trying to get to the U.S.?
Well, it's exactly in line with that. Remember, that rule was that if you stepped ashore, in other words, if you cross the territorial borderline and you put a foot inside the U.S., then you could claim asylum in the U.S. But none of these aliens in this lawsuit, none of them stepped across the line.
Well, what if they had? What if they had said, watch this, watch it, I'm putting my hand over the border. I'm now inside the U.S.
Well, I don't think a hand would work, but I think if you step inside the line, well, then it works. But in these cases, those aliens never got across the border, and the Supreme Court has said, look, if president wants to block their entry, he can do it, and they can't claim asylum unless and until they make it actually into the U.S.
And, of course, what the Biden administration was also doing then was granting temporary status. You can come on and roam about America, do what you will, and come back here in maybe 3 months, 3 years, 8 years, and we'll adjudicate if you have asylum.
Yeah, and the last time I looked at that number, something like 60% of aliens never showed up for their immigration hearing. Why would they?
I'm totally
They're in the country illegally.
Of course not. But we were expecting they would come back, right? Now, speaking about temporary asylum, temporary protected, that's the other case that came out of the Supreme Court, right, specifying that Haitian and Syrian nationals who have temporary protected status can no longer stay here. You've already extended, you cannot adjudicate it under temporary protected status.
Yeah, what happened was President Trump came in and he started ending temporary protected status for all these groups who'd been granted this in many years in the past. And all these courts stepped in and enjoined them and said, oh, you can't do that. Well, what the Supreme Court said yesterday, it was actually a very simple case. The statute that gives the president the ability to give temporary protected status specifically says there shall be no judicial review of the decision whether to either grant TPS or end it. And the Supreme Court simply enforced the statute and said all these courts who are issuing injunctions, they're barred from doing that.
You know, I had several pieces of an interview with the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, which we aired yesterday, and talking about how Europe, and I keep telling my audience, watch what happens in Europe, because they were basically saying letting migrants come in unvetted, unchecked for years, Merkel in Germany and elsewhere. And he says Brussels is no longer safe for Jews, and the UK is no longer safe because of Islamophobic issues taking over, as you'd say, Islam religious fanatics, jihadists, and he said many are wanting to leave the country. They fear staying here. That is what happened in Europe and UK and other countries, and yet we continue to ignore it in this country.
Well, yeah, and it's gotten so bad that, as I'm sure you saw, a Democratic socialist who says that we deserve to be hit on 9/11 just won a Democratic primary in the state of New York.
Yeah. Crazies. Absolutely crazies. There's another ruling I want to get through to you. This is very important for Second Amendment rights. This deals with a case in Hawaii called the so-called vampire rule, citizens carrying concealed carry permits.
Yeah, look, that case Hawaii has always been very restrictive of gun rights. They never allowed concealed carry when the Supreme Court ruled you can't prohibit that. They finally put in a law allowing concealed carry, but it was in order to try to prevent as many folks from being able to use a concealed carry permit. They basically put in a rule that would have banned concealed carry permit holders from over 95% of the land in all of the islands of Hawaii. It was a virtual ban. And the Supreme Court came in and said, I'm sorry, but you can't do that. It's a violation of the Voting Rights Act. By the way, very embarrassing. Trying to find some kind of historical precedent for this, Hawaii tried to use an 1865 law passed in Louisiana that was part of the black codes, the laws that were passed to prevent who? Newly freed black citizens from being able to arm themselves and defend themselves with the Ku Klux Klan. That's the law Hawaii was trying to rely on.
Yeah, Judge Alito pointed out that he said this regime is hobbling what the Second Amendment protects, the right of Americans to carry arms for self-defense as they go about their daily lives. We hold the law is unconstitutional.
That's right. And thank goodness, this may have been in Hawaii, but this case protects gun owners all over the country.
All right. Now, to that extent, and let me take a moment to ask you, now you are with the Advancing American Freedom Group, and I know that you're the senior legal fellow, but exactly what is the Advancing American Freedom Group doing, and what are you doing on behalf of them?
It is a conservative think tank. It wants to have us be sure that we uphold the kind of conservative principles that Ronald Reagan pushed. A strong defense, smaller government, less taxation, and it's a growing think tank, and those are the ideas that we're pushing. And by the way, that includes forceful enforcement of our immigration laws.
Outstanding. I'd love to have you back in the future, sir.
Anytime.
All right. As always, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You bet. Have a great July 4th weekend. Hans von Spakovsky, now the senior legal fellow at Advancing American Freedom.